it hadn't collapsed. It was being reported that it had collapsed, and the woman reporting it for the BBC could clearly see it behind her shoulder, her left shoulder. So that was later drawn out and removed, and BBC said they'd lost that material and it's been discarded or destroyed. I mean, there's a big cover up from a global elite, from a global news network, and I'm not happy that they just blame it on a guy who's on kidney dialysis living in a cave. Just nonsense.
Well,
There
I think
was
that they were all involved. I think
there
that he
was
was one component, and that there was the other component that Kaiser referred to. So, Kaiser, would you like to flesh this out? Let's talk about Gelly and that operation that took place in August when they sealed the World Trade Center at night, turned off the security cameras, and let's talk about eventually who was in charge of that operation.
well, there was
Marvin Bush.
it was Mossad, but here's the thing: federal agents reported numerous times that they were getting visited by these art students, and it was Operation Jelly. You know, they rolled up. They knew everybody that was involved. I'm not the on my conspiracy. Mine's not that it was holograms because I do not believe that, but I believe it was assisted in different manners, and it was assisted by the Saudis. It was assisted by, and by the way, there's 26 pages of the official Mueller report. Yeah, the most trusted guy in federal law enforcement, right? Um, those pages were redacted. They're blank in the book when you buy it. You know, the official report. Now, the Pentagon, the World Trade Center, I think they had assistance internally. That's my opinion. Okay, because where the plane hit, the plane, and I'm putting air quotes by it, was right at DFAS, Defense Finance Accounting Center, their area. Because the day before, Donald Rumsfeld, and I remember before I left and came back home, and I was asleep when it happened,
He couldn't
driving
account
all
for
night.
money.
Yeah, yeah, it was like $3 trillion.
2.2 trillion, yeah.
Yeah, and so I remember that. My wife comes
But
up to me with tears in her eyes, and she goes, "James, 2 buildings in New York is destroyed. The Pentagon's on fire." And I look at her and I said, "Well, we're at war." There's a lot that went on that day. I don't want to get into the minutia of it, but what I did know was that something funky was afoot. The one that concerns me is World Trade Center Building 4. They called it on the news that the building was going to be pulled. Pulled means it's going to be
Yeah, that's
exploded.
Demolition.
building seven. That's building seven, by the way.
Seven.
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah.
yeah. I'm not a New Yorker. I'm just trying to go by memory, and I don't have
It's
this
okay. It's
stuff up.
okay. But I remember you and I heard the same thing. I
Right.
heard Silverstein. I think it was Silverstein's
Who?
voice that said, "Pull the
Yeah,
building."
Yeah.
yeah, that was later, but earlier on in the afternoon, you had news reporters there.
Before
You could hear
that,
explosions, and then they were saying, "Well, everybody get back, get back. They're going to pull the building."
yes,
So the
that was for the
firemen
regular
knew.
that was for the regular World Trade Centers, and they still played that on the repeats for like 2 hours. Because trust me, she came up after Building 1, Building 2 collapsed, and the Pentagon was on fire. So what's the space of time there? Less than an hour. And they were still broadcasting it while I was awake for 2 hours. That's a fact. And all of a sudden that gets rabbit hole and memory hold. And it was we had cable at that time. That's when I still listened to MSM. Um, they had it from BBC. They had it from CNN. CNN, folks, listen to me on something. CNN is in bed with the CIA like you would not believe. If you doubt me, look up Anderson Cooper. You know he's a Vanderbilt. Gloria Vanderbilt, the woman who designed the jeans, and going all the way back to Commodore Vanderbilt, who went against William Walker, why he invaded Nicaragua, which is another story. All these things have everything to do with the same thing. It's corruption.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting. You should make that connection.
Also, if
Commodore
I could just
Vanderbilt.
interlude on that, Robert, what's interesting about all these events is that there was always an exercise running concurrent to that. You know, for instance, on September 11th off the
Yes.
East Coast, they were running an exercise of planes hitting buildings,
Yep.
and all of the actual air, what do they call it, the air bases involved with those aircraft were the deviation points of where the civilian aircrafts, you know, change direction. They
Yep.
were over points of bases that were included in the air.
Exactly so. And no one could have chosen a more perfect point in which to disguise themselves with a sneak attack in the middle of an exercise that was about a sneak attack. Now, who knew about that operation? There
Well-
was no Department of Homeland Security in those days. That
Right.
came after, but it was CIA, NSA, FBI, Deep State, the U.S. Air Force. Listen,
And PNAC.
a month before the towers went down, I was caught in the midst of one of the most terrible things that ever happened to me. I ran into the 3 terrorists that were flying those planes on 9/11. I ran into them between 1999 and 2001 at an airport called Essex County Airport. And when they found out that I was investigating the crash of John F. Kennedy Jr. and that I had suspicions, which I made obvious, I went back to that airport on October 12th, Columbus Day, 1999, with the intention of investigating what really happened to JFK Jr.,
Yep.
who handled his plane. And I found out that these terrorists were training there and were also working as fuel monkeys, as I affectionately call the guys at the gas pump, and on the tarmac, towing planes, fixing wires, fueling them up. And between 1999, when I saw Marwan al-Shehi, he was the goon who flew the second plane into the South Tower. On election day of 2000, I had the weather turn on me from day to night as I was flying over Connecticut. I flew back to Caldwell, and I encountered another plane going to the same airport before me, and I heard the voice of the pilot in the air, and it hit me in the gut that this was a foreigner, that he was pretending to be German, speaking English with a German accent, but his R's were too soft. After we landed, I recognized it was Mohammed Atta. And when they found out that I was investigating JFK Jr.'s crash, they started to tinker with my plane, and they tried to bring me down 5 times. And one of those times, I got the airplane handed to me with one tire that was half flat and the wing tank on that side empty. So if I had not been very thorough in my pre-flight and just jumped into the plane, as so many pilots do, and tried to take off, the half-flat tire on the left would have slowed down the left side acceleration. The empty wing tank would have had more lift than the heavy wing tank, full wing tank on the right, and I would have cartwheeled, as they say, cartwheeled or augured in a fireball. And through the grace of God, I lived through the whole thing. And then in August, between August 9th and September 9th, for a whole month, I contacted the FBI, I contacted the Immigration Naturalization Service because they were foreigners, I contacted the FAA several times. The FBI and the FAA tried to help me. The FBI in New York tried to help me. But there was a turf war with New Jersey because the airport was in New Jersey. New York called New Jersey to go and investigate the situation at that airport, and that turf war resulted in head knocking, and they refused. And after the Trade Center towers came down, I called the FBI in Newark and told them, you know those guys I told you about in August? Those are the guys that just crashed into the World Trade Center. So everyone was looking the other way, and it was a cooperative effort, common interests, geopolitical interests, United States, Israel, Saudi Arabia. And now we have this situation whereby this president, I believe, is going to extract himself, extract us from that and let that collapse on itself. Kaiser, you want to take it up?
Yeah, I agree with you. Here's something that nobody talks about. At that time I'd served in the Army already and been in the Marine Corps and was with my first agency. Anyways, we had always been told that 2 places and a 3rd place have air defense artillery. They're Stinger missiles at that time on top of them. One was the World Trade Center, because people fail to remember how much gold was in the bottom of it. That was where we kept a lot of our gold, not Fort Knox, folks, that keeps national treasures. The other thing that I was consistently told was the Pentagon had ADA, air defense artillery, Stinger missiles, to bring down any plane or anything coming at it. And remember, the Gulf War had already happened, so we had Patriot missiles too, so I was just assuming they put up some sort of regular Patriot system on these buildings by this time, right? Our technology had increased so greatly. And then the White House too. So here I believe this, right? And then when it happened, I was told, oh, that, this, that, and the other. And I really can't get into it, but that caused me to question everything. But like I said, with that being said, my only belief is that it was assisted, and I don't know how it was assisted, but I know Tower 7, since I've been corrected, and you are correct. Like I said, some things, I'm an old man now, so my memory's faulty, and I thank you guys for doing that. That one was so blatant, and the insurance settlement of that there's just so much wrong with that one building that I'm thankful that the U.S. Assistant Attorney is actually going to take this up in some manner, and I think we will get to the bottom of it during this time. And that's all I have to say, brother.
If I could just interlude.
I would like to comment on the insurance a little bit later, but I'd like to turn it over to Johnny Webb for the London View.
Yeah, on the day, not long before or after, there was a movie, Die Hard 4, obviously a very famous movie. There was an exercise going on, or a bomb event in a school. Everyone's looking at this school, and in the background is the World Trade Center. What you see is, in this movie, they're talking about these trucks going in and shipping out all of this gold. And this is what was going on with the gold reserves down there. Underneath the World Trade Center, like you mentioned, James, there's the stock exchange, and you had the Fort Knox of New York. And that held all the gold, and that was being shipped out. And one of the things that was noted was not only that the trucks that were being used to take the gold, the trucks are also being used to clear the actual metals out in the daytime as well. And what was clear about the explosions of the World Trade Center is that most of the materials was already pre-cut as it fell to the sides of the trucks that were going to take it away. So there was a lot of things that just seemed so canny that it couldn't have been an accident, and this couldn't have been a group of terrorists in another country that organised and got it all running on their own. This was definitely an inside job. Plus, this is where the term came from,
Plus, you mentioned the gold. Real quick, Robert, it's going to take me 5 seconds to say this.
No, go ahead. Take your time. I just want you to hear the sirens.
Some of the gold, awesome. Some of the gold, and it was a large portion of it, had a Polynesian hula dancer on it. If you guys look up what that mark means, that was World War II German gold. And that was the first gold expedited out of WTC.
I'd like to take a moment to talk about something you mentioned, the insurance. I'd like to bring attention to the fact that until, June and July of 2001, the World Trade Center towers and that whole area was owned by Saudi Arabia. And then the Saudi Arabian entity made a deal to sell the buildings to Larry Silverstein. Now, these buildings, if my memory is correct, and I think it was 1968, when the buildings opened. So 2001 would make the World Trade Center buildings, the complex, uh, uh, that magic number in age of 33 years, or approximately 33 years old. And so they were getting old. And there was a problem with the fireproofing, that the buildings were constructed with a lot of asbestos, and the demolition of such a building would have to be handled very carefully, and it would have cost a tremendous amount of money. So what Silverstein did is he bought the buildings from the Saudi Arabians and instantly insured them for twice the amount that they were worth.
True.
And also, it was the first time in the history of the buildings, 33 years, that the second tower was actually insured. They'd only actually insured the first one.
All of these anomalies and strangenesses really point the finger to this being a huge geopolitical terrorist act and insurance scam. And those of you who listened to this program around April 15th heard the story of the sinking of the Titanic and the swapping of the sister ship of the Titanic, which was very heavily damaged and practically a total wreck, a total loss. They swapped the Titanic with the Olympic. They changed the names, and then this was J.P. Morgan. He insured the Titanic for twice the amount that it cost to build it. And in the process of sinking the Olympic as the Titanic, they also assassinated 3 millionaires who were racing back to New York in order to try to stop the Federal Reserve. So this is a technique. It's, like the football, every football team has its book of plays, runs and passes, patterns. We learn to recognize this pattern across a century. And it is clear that the Illuminati, let's just call them that, everybody is fond of that term and knows exactly what it means. The Illuminati, or as Benjamin Fulford calls it, the Castlerian banking cabal,
or the globalists,
or the deep state.
The deep state, all of them. It's the cabal.
The deep
is supranational. Totally it's above the nation state. But so go ahead, Kaiser.
Look, it's the globalist in common parlance. Those are the money people. The deep state's nothing more than the SES, the Special Executive Service, the unelected. They can't be fired. They can't be thrown out for ineptness. So please let's not confuse those two terms. The globalists are the money people.
So who put FEMA there the day before? And also, we're talking about Bush Senior. He was there.
Yeah.
And having a meeting in one of the hotels there, the Excalibur or whatever.
You're correct on these things.
With the ISI guy.
You're correct on these things, Johnny, but sometimes you get ahead of yourself. The deep state, you just mentioned FEMA. Who heads that? There's many SES directors, Special Executive Service directors. So when we start conflating terms, then the water gets muddied. And then they can say, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. No, look, a conspiracy theory is something that even I as a cop, when I would do stuff, I would have to figure out a theory of how it happened. And sometimes it would be real, sometimes it would be false. If it was real, then it's no longer a conspiracy theory, it's a conspiracy.
It's fact, yeah.
Yeah, it's a fact. The fact pattern progresses it. But if you muddy it with the SES, which is a real thing, and then you throw in this happened, this happened, this happened, those are facts. But now you've thrown everything else in with the SES, and they can say, no, that FEMA, they can discount you so easily that way. And that's pretty much why I'm a staunch person on let's separate the globalist, which we all know who those people were and are. And this has been a bad year for globalists. Think about it. Rockefellers, Z-Big, all these people croaking out. Think there might be a reason why? Like you said on the Titanic, Robert. how many people were assassinated?
Yeah.
There's a power
also,
move within the globalist.
But the old die, but they invest in young, and so if you have the Kushners and things like that, these are the next people that will take over. It's not like it's the elites and they're all dying out and that's the end of them, is it?
No.
There's always a continuum.
It's not. There's a continuum, but you also have to understand that's like saying the Democrat Party is being taken over right now by the social justice warriors, the communists. Okay, that's basically let's call them what they are, and that's like saying they're being replaced. They're not. Nancy Pelosi's not going to lose her power grip. The Supreme Court's not going to change unless they kill somebody like they did that one Chief Justice while he was hunting in Texas on a Democrat's land. That was an assassination. But see, we muddy the waters when we don't understand what, or not understand, let me rephrase that. We understand it, but we conflate terms. And that's what I'm talking about avoiding, brother. And I don't mean disrespect. I'm just trying to, because you're not from America, you don't understand a couple parts of our politics.
Sure.
And I'm just trying to inform you, brother, because, I've chewed a lot of the same dirt you have. We talked about it for 2 hours last night.
Well, I think of it like, when I was mentioning these things back in 2003, when it was happening, I think that the wound was so ugly and open that you would have just got beaten up by anyone. If you'd mentioned it, you would be damn out of order and you're not with us, you're against us. And bang, you'd get one in the chin. And it'd be expected. But today, Americans are open-minded. I wouldn't say they've fully overcome a wound, but you're questioning now. You're not just gullible and believing everything you're told. You're now in question mode. And for me, I'm sort of happy that that's the case, because debate can come on and then we can really find answers. And this is what this show's doing now,
Yeah.
Right.
And I'm honored to be part of it. I do feel offended that it's hurt America, that, you wasn't never at war. You were at war abroad for other countries, but you'd never had war on your doorstep, in a sense. So it was a big shake-up for Americans, and I did feel for you guys.
Right.
We have bombs and stuff going on in England. We still do. We had September 7/7. They were trying to associate it to a 9/11. But again, what did we have happening? We had an exercise happening that morning of visioning exactly the same things, buses and trains blowing up. And we had to go from an exercise to a real event. And how do we do that? Quick time thinking and quick time doing. This was Peter Powers who was in charge of the event. He said, why did we have we have a lot of banks in the city. We have a lot of Israeli businesses. Why wouldn't we do it? And it was clear to me that it was an organised event.
Courtesy of the GCHQ, who's also armpit deep in the dirty dossier and all the other stuff with Christopher Steele.
Right.
I mean, brother, it's all interconnected. The nodes are the only...
We're going to get into that.
There's an old Jewish thing in the Talmud.
We're going to get into that in a few minutes, but I would like to address something that all of us have pointed out. The 9/11 attacks and the depiction in the mass media of the 9/11 attack is replete with contradictions and dissonant information throughout. And I believe that is part of the psychological ploy to confuse us and turn us in against each other in our opinions of what happened. And so it creates, as it did in the JFK assassination, a community that is isolated in its own parochial view of the assassination.
Exactly.
For example, with Kennedy, there's a group that says, the mafia did it. Another group says, the CIA did it. Another says, the anti-Castro Cubans did it. The Ku Klux Klan and the John Bircher cops did it. And they fight each other, and they don't realize they all did it. It was a corporate event.
It was a corporate takedown.
The convention of hatred, And the same with the World Trade Center. Some people think, the Arabs, terrorists did it using only the airplanes. It's impossible for thermite to be used. That's crazy. Scalar weapons. And then each one thinks, no, my theory is the only one that's right. But all of them are right because it was a composite event.
Exactly.
The guys
most profound thing.
Charges. The guys planted the charges in August. The terrorists did fly airplanes into buildings. Those were not holograms, right? There were detonations in the buildings a few seconds before the impact because it was all so well timed. They were probably watching it in Washington in real time on those giant screens, like we saw depicted in Patriot games and all these movies, where the National Security Council is watching the terrorists being killed over there in North Africa via satellite. Also, there were UFO events. There were UFOs around the World Trade Center.
Right.
Distractions. But here's the thing that is beautiful. You just brought up that nobody focuses on. It was either the University of Nebraska or Oklahoma. And they had several seconds apart seismic events from New York. This is a FEMA thing. They look for seismic events. And so there's proof that seismic things happened spaced out. It wasn't just the impact. Then you have other seismic events. This is the issue. And I love how you... Look, it's the same thing happening within the... And I'm new to all this crap. But the UFO community, the truther community, all these different communities, everybody wants to have a penis measuring contest. That's not what this is about. This is about we have honest conversations, differing opinions, and we realize there's value to every opinion. And that's something it's called in a certain circle a purity spiral. And that purity spiral, if you go down it, then nobody's ever going to become the person that has all the information because nobody can. We all have our contributions.
Right now, here I want to backtrack a bit about the envelopment of the real attack covered by the exercise. It's impossible for the terrorists, the guys that flew the planes, to have just done it coincidentally by chance, just as we were having a drill or an exercise. Someone had to have leaked to, I'll call it the bin Laden group, someone had to have leaked to them that drill, the hijacking and attempted attack on buildings, that drill was going to happen on September 11th, or Osama bin Laden said, we want to do it on September 11th because it's a 1000th year anniversary of a famous battle in the history of Islam. And then the power structure said, okay, they want to do it on September 11th. It'll work even better because it'll have more weight behind it, more credibility. I believe that that's what happened. That there was the coordinated operation, and either the bin Laden group chose the date and they fixed the drill for that day, or we fixed the drill for that day and we had spies in our midst and they communicated that date to bin Laden. Let me say this: 1 month before, I was sitting in this room with my flight mechanic and my co-pilot, and he is a U.S. Air Force tech sergeant, and he was sitting in the chair, and I looked at him. Usually military guys are really pretty straight up and sit, with good posture, but he was sitting there, slouched down, curled down, leaning back, picking his nails and thinking. And I said, "Willie, what's up?" And he says to me, "Something big is up." And I said, "What?" He says, "I don't know, but something big is up. Something's going to happen." This is August. And I said, "What?" He said, "I just came back from the Air Force Base, which is McGuire Air Force Base." And he said, "There's a lot of activity there, and everybody says they're getting ready for something. Something big is going to happen, and everybody knows it." So the Air Force knew it in August. Right? Go ahead,
the day before, people always miss this. There was a guy by the name of Amir Masood, and he was an Afghani, and he was assassinated on September 10th, by he was an attention whore. I mean, a lot about him is this, that, and the other, but he was known as the Lion of the Panjir, and I have worked
Oh
in
yes,
Panjir.
Masood.
Yeah,
Yes, I
and
remember.
Ahmad Masood, here's what happened. I didn't even leave everywhere and come home yet, and all of a sudden he gets killed by a fake TV crew with a bomb in their camera.
Right.
This is fact. This happened, folks,
Yeah.
because they knew that Masood was heavily connected to the CIA. He knew everybody on the list, and that's what Al Qaeda means, is the list. And that would have been opened out like a blossom, like a poppy that just got cut and it's been scraped to get the opium out, which is why we're still there. You know, there's a lot of muff that gets thrown out, but you have to look at the little things. I learned that during that time because that was well known, except the American people didn't know it. I don't even know if Hollywood ever even told the truth on that. It's all about gaslighting. Folks, if you don't know what gaslighting is, please look it up. Understand that you've been gaslighted, and do not trust the mainstream media ever. I tell everybody on my page, don't believe me, look it up. Find out for yourself.
Right. Let me explain to the audience that the term comes from a 1940 movie about a
Yep.
French husband and an American wife, and he's a villain, and he slowly goes about. The movie is called Gaslight, and he goes about playing tricks to actually drive her crazy, to make her insane. So this that's where the term comes from. Some entity, some organization or government or agency will go out, target an individual or a group or a country, and bring in mind control media to confuse, to divide, and to agitate the individuals, to destabilize us basically on an emotional level, and very often by causing cognitive dissonance, presenting two elements as facts, except if they're both facts, they contradict each other.
Exactly.
And that creates that state of confusion that's called cognitive dissonance. It staggers you. It worries you. Our minds are naturally rational, and we try to be rational. But when someone presents us with two contradictory pieces of information and asks us to believe that they are both true, our minds and our souls rebel.
It makes you completely paranoid. Look, here's the thing I tell people. 3 things that will kill you. Paranoia, fear, and anger. Those 3 things, stay away from them. Anger leads to hatred. Fear leads to hatred. And so does paranoia. And it doesn't matter if you've been visited by people or whatever. They're not going to change my life. I'm not going to stop telling the truth. It should matter to none of us that. More truth, more speech. And if there's something wrong, I say, contradict me. I'm good with that. I'm not going to get into a penis measuring contest with any of you folks, because it's just not worth it. It's about trying to get facts out and let the people look it up. Don't go to Snopes. Don't go to Wikipedia. If you knew the corrupt bastards that fund that, your skin would crawl. If I actually turn the volume off, you could actually hear my skin crawling when I say that. It's horrible. And yet we all want to, I'm going to Snopes that. I'm going to wiki that. Yeah, well, you're going to the Annenberg Foundation. You're going to the Ford Foundation. There's a whole lot that you're going to that you just don't want to delve into.
Yeah. Johnny, you want to wrap this up on 9/11? Because at 4 o'clock, we're going to turn our attention to George H.W. Bush and the end of an era.
Yeah, well, just that before I'd even gone to America, I read the Nostradamus books back in the 80s and 90s. And in the early 90s, before I got to America, I read The Man Who Saw Tomorrow. And what it said is he said that in the new lands, and he was talking about unyet discovered America at this time, and he said, in the new lands, by the way of the man-made mountains, the sun will cause to burn twice. When silver turns to gold, not one inhabitant would remain. And that always stuck in my mind. And so when I went to America on a Camp America, a sort of exchange program for working on summer camps, I went out there to teach kayaking. And I got to the first camp, and I was telling people about, Nostradamus and the stories, because, we shared information and stories and stuff. And then I left in May, sort of end of May, and went back to England. And then literally after that, there was an attack on the World Trade Center. They didn't manage to bring the building down, but my understanding was it was an Al-Qaeda type cell that was organized and infiltrated by the government of America to run and give them an exercise and supply all the equipment to them. But it didn't bring the buildings down, and I'm really glad about that, But then soon after that, we had John Doe 1 and 2 from the Oklahoma bombings, and it was that bombing that disturbed me to again show that this was an inside job where, this is where you could see it wasn't America like wanting to kill Americans. It was the few that control the many, unfortunately. And, we call it cabal, we call it, all these different names. But there is an evil at work. And, as a whole, I think Americans are good people. They're not evil. I'd live in America tomorrow. I feel comfortable in America. I realized that the changes from when I lived there in the 90s to today, even going back 2 years ago, you've been, fundamentally hit in the pocket, just like England, and your middle class is non-existent like our middle class is now. We've all gone under the belt, But as I say, as people, as open-minded, I like Americans. I think you guys are great people, and I would feel honored to live in America. But, as I say, with September 11th, it still needs thorough investigation. You're over the wound. You can talk about it now, and I think that you will nip it in the bud and find out who the perpetrators were and who benefited, the pro bono of it.
I agree,
and I look forward to that day, guys.
I agree.
Right.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Right. The time is 4:01 in the East, and the subject now changes to the end of an era. But this era included the great event, the Great Terror. Hey, Johnny, you talk about Nostradamus, and he often talks about the Great Terror in his quatrains. I've found it many times. And it's very interesting that now we turn to the progenitor, or the main proponent of the New World Order. So I'd like to read you a very brief bio of George Herbert Walker Bush. June 12th, 1924 through November 30th, 2018, was an American politician who served as the 41st President of the United States from 1989 to 1993. Prior to assuming the presidency, Bush served as the 43rd Vice President of the United States from 81 to 89. As a member of the Republican Party, he had previously been a U.S. representative, an ambassador, director of the Central Intelligence Agency. During his career in public service, he was known simply as George Bush. From 2001 until his death, he was often referred to as H.W. Bush, or Bush 41, or Bush Sr., to distinguish him from his eldest son, George W. Bush, 43rd President of the United States. The scion of the Bush family was born in Milton, Massachusetts, to Prescott Bush and Dorothy Walker Bush. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, Bush postponed his university studies, enlisted in the United States Navy on his 18th birthday, became the youngest aviator in the U.S. Navy at the time. He served until September 1945, the last president to have participated in the war, and then attended Yale University. Graduating in 1948, he moved his family to West Texas, where he entered the oil business, became a millionaire by the age of 40 in 1964. Notice that this biography leaves out his entire career as a CIA agent from 1952, probably till the end of his days. Soon after founding his own oil company, Zapata Oil, which was also the
Yep.
name of the invasion plan for Cuba at the Bay of Pigs. Founding his own, he became involved in politics. He was defeated in his first election for the U.S. Senate in 1964, but won an election to the House of Representatives from Texas's 7th District in 1966. He was reelected in 68, but was defeated for election to the Senate again in 1970. In 1971, President Richard Nixon appointed Bush as ambassador to the United Nations, and in 1973, Bush became chairman of the Republican National Committee. The following year, President Gerald Ford appointed Bush as chief of the liaison office in China, and
Yep.
later reassigned Bush to the position of Director of Central Intelligence. Bush ran for president in 1980, was defeated in the Republican primary by Ronald Reagan. I think that's enough on his
Thank
early
God.
life.
As Hunter S. Thompson said, brother, he was
Yeah.
the most successful politician ever. Hunter S. Thompson said this,
Yeah,
and the only one that was more successful was Richard Milhouse Nixon. And
right.
so your opening is very apropos. I mean, it should put a person in awe, but if you think about it, they set Hillary Clinton, the wife of a president, up to be coronated to be president. And that's basically what Bush Sr. got. Not seniors. Well, for the George name, he is first of his name. But then we had the son follow along. And I think America was just sick of the Clinton-Bush continuum.
Yeah, but Clinton-Bush dynasty, you might as well say. And really, let's backtrack. How did Bill Clinton get to be president? Kaiser, do you want to talk a little bit about Mina? We know all about it, and you talked about Barry.
Oh, yeah.
Tell the audience about that relationship that existed throughout the 70s and 80s between George H.W. Bush and the up-and-coming Attorney General, then Governor of Arkansas.
Yeah.
Please enlighten the audience.
Go watch the movie American Made. That actually, I was dubious because Tom Cruise was the star in it. But it actually follows the line close. I mean, it is almost parallel. There's some deviance, and I know what they are. But it's still during the same time that there was another guy, Frank Camper. And Frank Camper had a mercenary school during that time, too. Not getting into specifics on this stuff, but it was down in Georgia. And he was arrested because he was training people for Libyan hit squads that were supposedly going after Reagan at that time. And this is after Hinckley, and remember, Hinckley's the only presidential assassin that got weekends off to go visit Mama. Now, Mina, you had a couple kids die on railroad tracks very close to Barry Seal's place. They were training people to go fight. That's where Oliver North got his fame. They were training people to go fight in Nicaragua and Honduras.
Right. You want to tell people about the Iran-Contra deal? Because this, what we're fleshing out over here is an incredible narco-trafficking, arms dealing, human trafficking network.
Yeah.
So why don't you go back there a little bit and tell the audience about that?
Most of the people, and this is where the movie hits it on the head, they're like, we're losing people every day. Yeah, we were, but Reagan had said, amnesty, that he was forced into that by Congress. And so these people would bring them up to train them, and they would disappear into America. They're in a fabric of our life, folks. You have trained killers that people have killed. These people have killed. This is no joke. They don't have a compunction to pull a trigger. And we've allowed them to integrate into the fabric of our society. I'm not talking about veterans. I'm talking about people who are foreign, who have no compunction. So when our prisons all of a sudden fill up with people of Spanish descent, Oh, that should be just like, oh wow, it's accidental. No, it's not. It's purpose driven. Everything's purpose driven. Don't doubt me on this. There are no coincidences. There is absolutely no coincidence, and I'll shut my mouth.
I would like to take a moment to give a shout out to our friends on Facebook who are following this conversation. Julie Ridgway is sharing some links with us. One is called The Bush Connection. The other one is an interview with Stephen D. Kelly, and what he describes as a Norwegian computer nerd who worked at the World Trade Centers, and explains how the explosives were planted under the bedrock and then exploded at the right time. So those two links are there, and I thank Julie Ridgway and Tess Cabrera and our other friends, Nancy and Tess and William Michael Mott. And I welcome William. Come on the show sometime. It's been a long time. William is a radio host of several very well-known radio shows, and he was one of the people that encouraged me to become a radio commentator and radio journalist. So thank you all for supporting this program. I would also ask you to support Revolution Radio, which runs strictly on public donations, and it takes quite a bit of money to run a broadcasting operation of this nature. And I thank you all for listening, and I thank you all for contributing and following along. So we now turn again to this historic personage, George H.W. Bush. And I think we should backtrack a little bit as to his family's preeminent role in arms dealing and gun running, popularly known as merchants of death.
Yeah,
which
all
goes
the way
back
to Prescott. Yeah,
even before that. Samuel Bush, before Prescott, during World War I, was heavily involved in providing weapons to the United States Army, the United States Armed Services, and he grew very rich as a result of World War I. Then he already had his son Prescott Bush on the fast track in this industry and others, and grooming him. It was grooming Prescott Bush for the presidency in the same way that Joseph P. Kennedy was grooming his eldest son Joseph Jr., who was lost in World War II in a bomber explosion, and then John F. Kennedy inherited the mantle of president-to-be. So
the weaker
going back to
kingmakers.
Hold on one second, Johnny. The weaker son, JFK, ended up being the stronger son if you look back on him. JFK was so much far more superior than the older brother that was groomed. Teddy Kennedy was the weakest son, and we can go into that some other time. But with Prescott Bush, here's the thing. The Kennedys made their money on booze, prostitution, all those kind of fun things. The Bushes took it a little more seriously, and here's why I say this. Zapata oil, all this stuff. Remember Ohio, Standard Oil of Ohio? That was in America. In America, for us, it was Ohio in Ohio. Ohio got bought out by BP, but Bush, Prescott, and the family owned Standard Oil, and they used to refuel German subs off our Atlantic coast. And the only people that kept our Atlantic coast, this is where you have to think about Hoover at this point.
Yes.
The only people that kept our East Coast secure, you know who they were? It was the flippin' Italian mafia. We didn't have anything secure in our ports or anything at that time like the mafia. And these people, they always want to say this, that, and the other, but there was a time in America, in up to the 70s, where if somebody said somebody's name, somebody in your own family would be like, yeah, I know who that person is, and I know what they do, and this, that, and the other. And somehow we've lost that in America because we've so diluted and polluted it with these people from the third world. And that's all I have to say.
Yeah. I wanted, you brought an interesting subject up, the mafia protecting the East Coast. And I don't think the audience understands how that worked. Protecting the East Coast meant finding out all the spies that were operating in the port cities. In New York City was the biggest port in the nation. Then there was Baltimore, and then farther south, the southern ports. But in New York, where many of the convoys that were going to England with supplies to help them against Germany, they would be loaded and would ship out and then congregate, meet at specific sites in the Atlantic to form the convoys. And there were prowling U-boats off Long Island. They were knocking off our ships, and the only way that they could do it so handily was that we had spies, collaborators, working in the longshoremen's, the docks, the ship loading and unloading operations there, which were run by the mafia. But here's a very interesting thing: the green card. Okay, we all know what that means to an immigrant. They all want to come here. The ones that come legally, they want to get a green card. But I want to tell you one of the most remarkable secrets that I've ever learned. The green card started in World War II.
Yes, it did. Yes,
and what the green card was, you've heard of James Bond 007 and the License to Kill? Well, folks, the green card, the first green cards, were precisely that. This was revealed to me by a very old Time magazine journalist who was heavily involved in the JFK assassination and discovered Oswald's connection to the FBI and CIA, etc. But he took me aside and he said, "Do you know where the green card came from?" And then he told me, in World War II, we were not ready. We had no knowledge of who was operating in the docks, who were the spies, who were what they called fifth columnists.
Right.
But the British did.
Yep.
And so what happened was we allowed British agents to come to the United States under a special visa, which was the green card. And when they were given this green card with official federal recognition and authorization, they started to prowl the docks, the shipyards, and trying to find the Nazi collaborators and spies. And when they found them, they would just go and dispatch them.
Yeah.
Bang, bang, bang.
Nazis.
And then they'd wait, by the way. They wouldn't run away. They'd stay by the body, wait for the New York police to show up, and identify themselves, show them the green card, and the cops knew already because of their liaison with the FBI and the federal government, this was a British agent, and he's just killed a Nazi operator in our midst.
And that's the reason why, up until recently, up till 2000, if you were active duty Army, Marine, Air Force, Navy, Coast Guard, you had a green card that had your ID. Your ID was actually green, a green ID. And now they have a white card that just says reserve or whatever. If you were active duty, you had a green card. The red ID, which they call it a salmon pink, that was for reservists. But an active duty troop had a license to kill. It's the same thing. It's just like if I go hunting, like I do, and I kill a deer. I have to tag it before I move it. If I move it, then I've interfered with it, and I can be arrested by a game warden. Think about it this way, folks. It was a hunting license. And we have so corrupted things that a lot of people don't understand the reality of the situation. And I'm glad you brought that up, Robert, about the green card, because that is a necessary augmentation to this conversation.
Right. Well, let's segue here. You know, this green card initiation is what established the liaison between the U.S. federal government surveillance and intelligence agencies with British intelligence. Then the war came and went. Then the Cold War came, and we were brought into even a tighter relationship with Britain, MI6, MI5, and coordinating with the FBI and, of course, with the CIA. And this is where we have this really interesting relationship of counterintelligence with British intelligence and with the Mossad in the persons of James Jesus Angleton, Chief of Counterintelligence of the CIA, yep. Kim Philby, a British intelligence agent who was actually a spy for Stalin for 30 years. And these two, Kim Philby and James Jesus Angleton, having been the founders, in fact, of the Mossad. They went to Israel in 1947-48, and they organized the Mossad so that the Mossad actually became a subcomponent or a bureau annexed to the CIA, and it was controlled by James Jesus Angleton. Do you want to, let's go to Johnny. Do you want to expand on that? Do you want
well, I just wanted to ask you, does that mean that this gentleman was sort of a Zionist type member, you know, pushing a Zionist influence?
Which one? Angleton?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Angleton was, you would have to say that he was fully in support of the foundation of Israel and worked very closely with as a matter of fact, the biographies of James Jesus Angleton make it very clear that he jealously guarded what he called the Israeli desk. The different departments in the CIA have different names, and they usually involve desk. For example, the officer in charge of UFO investigations and collection of UFO-related material, abductions and sightings, etc., he is the director of the Weird Desk. And so Angleton was the director of the Israeli desk. And it is clear that the United States used the Mossad very regularly in operations, wet works in Europe, and on November 22nd, 1963, it just so happens that Shimon Peres, the head of the Israeli Atomic Energy Commission, was in Dallas to observe the assassination. And that's because there was a huge Israeli grudge against President Kennedy, because President Kennedy had forced the resignation of the first president or first prime minister of Israel, David Ben-Gurion. And the reason was atomic proliferation and President Kennedy's desire to stop the development of the Israeli nuclear bomb, which was being developed. You know, the same thing that we're going through now with Iran, President Kennedy went through with Israel. And he demanded that they cease and desist from building any more nuclear weapons. He insisted on free and open inspections of the Dimona nuclear reaction every 6 months. And when the Israelis balked, President Kennedy laid down the law and he said, if you don't comply, I'm going to cut off foreign aid. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah, that's part of it.
Ben-Gurion refused. Ben-Gurion refused to allow the inspections or cease and desist the atomic development. And in protest, he resigned the prime ministership of Israel. And according to John Lear, the last order he gave as he walked out of the prime minister's office was to the Mossad and Shin Bet, and was kill Kennedy. So that's why I call it a convention of hatred.
It was. It was, but there's a deeper story to it.
Go ahead.
Do you know what country actually developed Israel's nukes?
South Africa.
That's right. And who is being wiped out right now?
South Africans of a particular hue and color.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's horrible, folks. You don't hear anything. The media is ignoring the white genocide in South Africa, and they cover up the statistics. For example, South African police, when a farm is overrun and the farmer and his family are killed, a farmer, let's say with 3 daughters and 2 sons and a wife, butchered, and literally meat sold on the black market there.
That's real.
It's a horrible situation. People don't want to hear it, but it is absolutely true. Cannibalism is being practiced as I speak in many parts of Africa, and there are human meat markets in South Africa. You do your research, you'll find the truth. So South Africa was in league with Israel in the co-development of a nuclear weapon, and it is believed that they did successfully test one in the southern Atlantic Ocean, or in the southern tip of Africa. One of our satellites picked up what appeared to be a white flash of light that came out from under the sea, and it was assumed that it was a successful South African and Israeli nuclear test.
It was a deep water nuke.
So that's the situation. And right now, Africa is being overrun by a Chinese-funded pan-Islamic African movement. And that's why we're fighting Boko Haram over there in Somalia, and the other terrorist organizations in sub-Saharan Africa, which are creating chaos in the hope of overrunning.
The other interesting thing that nobody wants to talk about, and it drives me nuts. Okay, they use altruism from the West, because the West, we have a lot of altruism. We want to help starving kids. We want to do this, that, and the other. Here's the issue right now. The Chinese don't have that compunction. So here's what's going to happen. When they have used the useful idiots of Africa to overrun Europa, and they will, 2 things will happen. Probably it'll be the East that saves the West this time, when the last time it was the West who saved the East in the last crusade. Charles Martel and all those people.
Right.
So now, the Chinese don't have a compunction of genocide. They've proven it over and over again. And if you think Xi is some sort of great guy, no. They're taking over Africa right now. They're stripping it. They're like, I don't even know how to describe them. I don't even know what to think about the Chinese, other than they're going to strip their land. They're going to allow them to breed prolifically. They're talking about 7.5 billion people in Africa. And the West, we're the only countermeasure for Africa to keep them safe from the Chinese, but they invite them in. And
right. Money talks.
Money talks, bullshit walks. Always.
Well, while money talks, I wanted to talk about the DEWs, these direct energy weapons being used in Malibu and Paradise a couple of weeks back. Well, we clearly see that there's fires being burnt on property, but the trees and surrounding forests are intact. So we can see selective targeted sort of like burnings. Companies that work with lasers that are in their area, their properties are all intact. Everything around is burnt. And it's going right along, from south to north. And I was reading a couple of weeks back that there's a new program due to come out in the next year, which is about a big water program that goes from the north to the south, supplying fresh waters. And it's in the billions, $500-600 billion worth of monies. But it needed to go through certain lands, which there would have possibly been oppositions. Malibu Beach, nice surrounding properties. We don't want to move. But I saw a video like 2 weeks ago of Malibu Beach, and I was there with Dr. J 2 years ago on Malibu Beach, and it was beautiful. But on this occasion, it was sprawled with cars, and a helicopter at one case just burnt out, the whole of the beach just alight. It looked horrendous, and it just didn't look natural. It certainly didn't look like a campfire. And then I was reading about, these direct energy weapons that can be used on not just jumbo jets now, but on small aircraft, and obviously now the new drones that the government have, the X-45s and stuff. I'm just wondering, for the pair of you as Americans, even reaching out to Ella Mazzulli, who's had his house burnt down, I'd like to get you guys' opinions on what you think it is. Do you think there's a program that's pushing, residents out of their properties in order to go forward with a plan? Or what's your thoughts?
I do. I've reached out to him and Richard Shaw. I believe that this is declared a way for what they thought was going to be the invasion, and it's petered out. These people are going home. The funny thing is finally they're finding adversity trying to cross our damn border. And these people that, look, if you bring in a mass of the third world from wherever, you can bring in a few and whatever, and they may assimilate, and you can watch them. But when you bring in thousands, and this is what they were counting on, Europa is seeing it right now. Johnny, you have it in spades, brother, and you know this. Here's the problem. You expect them to act differently. There's a reason why San Francisco now has a brown app, so you can avoid stepping in human feces in the streets. That's a real thing, folks. Look it up, the brown app for San Francisco, to allow you not to step in human poo or needles. It's a sickening concept, but you have to remember it's about destroying culture, and that's what this is about.
Well, when I was in America 2 years ago, I noticed that you have what used to be a rich and poor divide, but it doesn't seem to be, because on the doorsteps of millionaire mansions were tents, and it wasn't just a couple of tents, it was for miles. We drove for miles around LA, and I couldn't believe the destitute of people. And like you've mentioned, among that must have been feces. I think there's an epidemic now there, I understand, with some sort of brought on disease that you get with destitution and rough living, and to me, we're talking about the first world country, America. It burns me to believe that just because it's an independent state, it doesn't come under the wing of the whole country.
The first world gets polluted by the third and second world. You can't expect to bring a bunch of third and second world into the first world and maintain a first world lifestyle. It's not going to happen, Johnny, honestly, and you're seeing it in Europa.
Exactly. Just compare pictures of Johannesburg from the 1960s and 70s with Johannesburg today. I also wanted to talk about what or who brought all of this about. But before I go there, on this land clearing scheme, I want to say to people, we're all being distracted and our attention is being focused on the southern border and the migrants, but nobody wants to focus on their origin and why the Hondurans, Guatemalans, Salvadorans, and Nicaraguans are fleeing north. The same thing that James just said about Africa applies to Central and South America. The Chinese have taken over. The Chinese dominate Central America. They control both sides of the Panama Canal, which Democrat President Jimmy Carter gave back to them gratis. And as soon as he gave them the canal, they turned it over to the Chinese. And now the Chinese have the largest piers and loading docks in the world, north and south of the Panama Canal. And I see those as jump points for a full-fledged invasion of the Americas to come within 20 and probably less than 20 years.
It's not
now,
even just
Nicaragua. Let me just say this. I'm very close to the Nicaraguan situation. I have cousins there who are sending me videos and reports about the slaughters, the murders that the Sandinistas are conducting. 90% of the populace of Nicaragua, the urban small cities, okay, they're towns to us, but 90% of the population is fleeing into the jungles to get away from the goon squads that the Sandinistas are sending out to torture, maim, and kill young people in particular, because this insurrection in Nicaragua broke out in March and April, because a fire was set in something called Indio Maíz Biological Preserve, designated as one of the United Nations trusts. And
Yeah.
yes, but it is a precious resource. And the Chinese have been building a canal in Nicaragua. They want to build this monstrosity of a sea level canal, or practically sea level canal, through Nicaragua to join the Caribbean, ergo the Atlantic Ocean, with the Pacific, right straight through Nicaragua.
Yep.
And as a result, they have been expropriating people, and in their desire to clear land very quickly for roads and new towns for the industrial workers who are being Chinese workers are there, and also Nicaraguan slaves are there. So they had to clear the land, so they torched the Indio Maíz Biological Preserve, a rainforest of pristine beauty and remarkable zoology.
I know.
And the people noticed that the government was told, and they did nothing to try to stop the fire. Why? Because they wanted it to happen. So the people began protests. The younger people, the college students, the high school students, and Nicaraguan's Sandinista government was so desperate that they brought in special forces from Cuba to help them put down the insurrection. And I've seen films of Cuban special forces troops mauling 12-year-old boys, 14-year-old boys, kicking them with knees in the groin, breaking their ribs, smacking their skulls, killing and disappearing. There's one thing is an overkilling, and then there's disappearances. You just never see the person again.
It's what happens when people don't have the right to defend themselves. The Second Amendment. They were going they were going after the Second Amendment hard. Now they're going after the First Amendment, because the Second Amendment secures the First Amendment. But if you shut down the First Amendment, I don't care if somebody says they're a racist, a Nazi, a fascist, a communist. I don't care what anybody says. I get to know who they are by what they say. I want to hear more speech, not less. And they are shutting everybody down. That's why this shutting down of speech is more devastating than any of you want to know. This is horrible. And you can social signal all you want. Oh, I'm not a racist. I'm not. You know what? In the end, you're a useful idiot. And what has Antifa said? Honestly, what have they said? They said the liberals get the rope after we're done with the fascists. Isn't that pretty funny? So, folks, just open your minds up and see what's going on. There's a game afoot. Robert's exactly right. Now you're going to have two canals that the U.S. don't have access to. So if we have to move our fleet from the Atlantic to the Pacific, and the people that are working on both canals are young military-aged Chinese men, and they are in the military. So if we want to transverse, we have to go all the way down to South America and come back up. That means a delay of time. And with satellites the way they are, the rod of God from China or us or whatever is going to come down, and that means our people are going to die.
Now let's ask this question. Who's responsible for this geopolitical situation? And we come back to that baby that was created and nurtured by the likes of James Jesus Ankleton, Kim Philby, and George H.W. Bush. The situation in Central America, especially in the 70s, Carter administration, early Reagan administration was something that was being overseen by then CIA Director George H.W. Bush. And that operation has caused chaos and the loss of American prestige and the loss of American influence throughout Central and South America.
Exactly. I mean,
And then again, the intriguing, going back, how intriguing it was. When I heard about it, I just couldn't fathom how Nicaragua and Iran could be related, and the Iran Contra, situation with using drug money to finance arms and weapons, and then selling weapons to the Iranians in a three-way deal. It was really incredible that anybody could conceive such a thing, but they did. And actually, it was totally illegal. It was unconstitutional. But the power of the Central Intelligence Agency and the National Security Agency to cover up and to shield and to hide is incredible. And so many people who should have gone to jail are still walking free today and appearing on as talking heads on television programs.
some of those people.
Hey, let's get into the British connection. We have about 20 minutes left,
All
and Kaiser and I were discussing the British intelligence connection to the Steele dossier and the Hillary Clinton collusion with the Russians. So first, let's say, Kaiser, flesh it out for us with the British intelligence and the Steele dossier and the Russian collusion. And then I'm going to turn to Johnny for his point of view as a Londoner looking at this, the Russiagate, and knowing the facts of how deeply involved Britain is, in the attempt to depose President Trump. So, Kaiser, you go first.
Yeah,
and
super easy. It'll take me a couple minutes, or maybe
go ahead.
maybe a minute.
Now, take about 3. Really be thorough.
It goes into uranium-1 and a couple other little deals she did through the money laundering system she had with the Clinton Foundation. That was nothing but money laundering. Everybody doesn't want to hear it. They all want to think their person's the best. That's not the fact. She was corrupt. Billy Boy has been corrupt forever since Mina. And he was a part. Here's where the nexus goes to G.H.W. Bush. He learned from the best. And remember, everybody wants to keep saying that William Jefferson Blythe Clinton, because Jefferson Blythe was a well-known war combat veteran who had earned a medal and died in a pickup truck, but his mother had the morals of an alley cat. And we all know that she opened her legs for Fulbright. And so here's the problem we have. That's why he got the Fulbright scholarship. Fulbright was an actual senator from Arkansas. That's why he also got the scholarship to go over to England for the Cecil B. Rhodes scholarship. And
which he lost when he raped a girl in Oxford.
Exactly.
And then he was thrown out of Oxford. And did he come home? No, he did not come home in shame.
That's right.
Where did he go, Shuff?
You know where
he went?
Yeah.
Yeah. He went to Russia.
Russia. And he hung out there. And he used that picture. This is back in the day. Remember, he had to have a civilian force that was, it's not Obama's, but it was, he wanted to run it off of what JFK made, which was the Peace Corps. And he called it the, AmeriCorps. And he started that program up, and then all of a sudden under Obama, see how this thing runs. They're justifying from a justified man who was trying to do something correct, which is JFK. You have Clinton building on it with AmeriCorps, and then you had Obama saying, we need a civilian force, just as well equipped, just well funded as the military. Think about this, folks. That was when he, as a community agitator,
community organizer, yeah.
Yeah, I call it an agitator.
Yeah, let me just say, that was an incredible proposal that he was going to arm. He was going to recruit and arm a civilian what corps? What did he call it?
I believe it was a civilian security force.
Yes, civilian security.
And then what was his first thing he did? His little friend from Harvard, the professor who looked like he was breaking into a house, cop stops him, doesn't really arrest him, nothing really big happens, but then they have the beer summit, and he says the police acted wrongly. And then later on,
stupid. He said he acted stupid.
And yeah, acted stupidly. That's right. And then the next thing he does is Trayvon Martin could have been my son. No, he couldn't have been your son because you're married to Michael. Your kids aren't even your own. That's my 2 cents on that. And if you doubt me, go look at Michael dancing with Ellen DeGeneres on her show, and you'll see something bouncing between the legs. I'm not going to try to change anybody's thoughts.
Right. Well, let me hear Johnny's take on this, and then I want to come back and really flesh out the GCHQ connection to Christopher Steele, and I think the betrayal of the United States by British intelligence. I'm really not fond of James Bond anymore. So let me hand it over to Johnny, and then I'll tell you why.
Well, that's very nice of you, Robert. It's hard to say, when you say British intelligence, I think of like going back medieval times to the first 007. But when we're talking about, say, intelligence or British intelligence working against America, then you have to go back to the Redcoats. But, from then to today, the old statement was, okay, we've sent our troops over and they've beat us. So what we'll do, we'll just wait and we'll buy America back. And so what I see is that the Queen or the DVD, the real rulers of the world, check that out. We've got a British military intelligence guy called Michael Shrimpton, and he talks vigorously about the DVD, the Deutsche. I can't remember the other 2 words that are in German, but it's basically the real forces that run the world. And Germany never ever lost the war; they just went underground. The German Empire from the east that came over to Europe and then sort of successively interbred and made what is today's European Germans and German Jews, and the British, that are Germans. Our royal family is Coburg, Saxe, Gotha. They're not Windsors. The Windsor sounds very English, but it was attuned to comfort the Second World War because we were run by Nazis. We still are. The whole shebang today is still Nazi run. So America being infiltrated by British military intelligence would be what we have today, where German, Project Paperclip, Operation Paperclip, these Nazis came over. They wasn't arrested and hung like the rest of them. They were given the Nazi programs to start the CIA, to start NSA, all the alphabet companies that you have today, including obviously the NASA program, the biggest swallow of black book money or black project money. It's vigorous today in your society. So for me, I feel that, England and America, brother and sister, allies, lapdog of America, whatever they want to call it. We've been tied to you for a very long time. But to me, I'd say you're more closer than we are to the French, although the French, different language, don't want to speak English, want their independent own language. I respect that. But when it comes to pally-pally, we're more close with Americans possibly than we are even Australians, So, that's my thought on it in regards to where, say, you had, like you said, British intelligence that interfered in America. Going up to today's wording of that, we think of Trump, and then we think of like the killing of these diplomat or these Russian spies in Salisbury in England, and a big cover up from the British government. There's certainly been that. There's certainly been underlying forces trying to say it's a Trump deal and it's Trump and Russia's. A lot of blasphemy and negative attitude towards Trump. But as an Englishman, when you sit and you watch the politics and you see it on the news and the swaying and their chief, editors trying to put over a message, when you feel and see through it, you can see the game being played quite in front of your face, and it's laughable when I listen to it.
Exactly.
I'd like to qualify what I said before. I don't believe that the Queen or the Prime Ministry had any knowledge of the Christopher Steele affair. I think that this was being run by a rogue element of MI6, and that it was happening sub rosa, and that the Queen and the Prime Ministry had no knowledge of it. But that being said, the facts do stand that we have two issues before us. There's the real Russian collusion and the fake Russian collusion.
That's
the
right.
Russiagate Mueller affair is fake. It is a smear, a political smear, and a counter operation to try to protect the guilty, the traitors. Among them, Robert Mueller, who is part and parcel of the real Russian collusion, which is the Uranium One deal, and how that deal was conducted. Robert Mueller's role in being the mule who delivered the goods. September 9th of 2009, he went to Russia under the cover story of returning to Russia highly enriched uranium which had been confiscated in Georgia. That was the cover story. He arrived and he presented a sample. 1 year later, during which time the Uranium One deal was negotiated by the Obama-Clinton State Department, using a Canadian company as an intermediary, as a front, as a cutout. They agreed to and authorized the sale of 20% of America's uranium to Russia through a front company called Uranium One. Now, for that deal to go through, it had to be approved by a committee called CFUSA, Committee on Foreign Investments in the USA. And who is in CFUSA? Everyone, from the president down to the attorney general.
Hillary, Holder,
and
Obama.
Go ahead.
All of them. They were involved in this.
Clapper,
Brennan,
Comey,
well,
Mueller. The list is long.
I know.
The list.
Brennan is the convert.
But I can rattle them off.
I could too, but
Brennan, 10, at least 10.
There's probably more than that. Brennan converted to Islam when he was Riyadh station chief, and he tries to be more pious than now. The best takedown of him I ever saw was Chris Peranto, who was in Benghazi, and he was like, "Yeah, you're right, security clearances," and I'm the same way. Remember, I travel only in the Sub Rosa subway. That's a Klaatu reference. If people want to look it up, it's a great song. But there's real meaning to Sub Rosa and subways. Here's the thing that I'm telling you right now, and I mean this. You need to look this stuff up. Robert's not lying to you. Look it up. With the Michelle thing, Michael thing, it's tongue-in-cheek, but it's also something to stir up thought. Go look at the Ellen DeGeneres thing and just come to your own conclusion, because Obama was always in the Down Low Club in Chicago. And you have to look up his church and all that stuff. But
look up Richard Sinclair. Richard Sinclair.
I remember in the early days of Alex Jones years ago, on the early days, but going back about 2000, 2001, maybe 2003. But at them days, there was Barry Sahatu, and there was this other guy, a gay guy that came on, and he was on live, and he did a show, and he said he was the boyfriend of
Barry
today's
Soetoro was Barack Obama's real name.
Yeah, and Richard,
Yeah.
you're talking about Richard Sinclair,
Yeah, you're talking about
who
Richard Sinclair.
supplied cocaine and
yeah,
favors.
And
yeah.
blowjobs,
But
yeah.
so then when obviously you start to talk about Michael, the boyfriend, and people saying that Michelle Obama is a man, we have a thing called anatomy, and anatomy defines what a man and a woman looks like in the physics. And so there's been a lot of questions because I watched a few documentaries from American American police that were under forensics, and they studied forensics of anatomy. And so they say the bones tell a story. So if you dig a bone up, you can see if it's a man or a woman and roughly give an age from certain dimensions of the bones.
Right.
So when they say that these dimensions are what they are, it makes me wide-eyed because I think, wow, it looks like a woman, but now I'm being told it's a man. The physique is a man. You mentioned, on that show where she's dancing, you can see something between the legs. I don't know about that, that particular
You can see
scene.
it bounce out. You can see it bounce out. They were loose clothes. And
Yeah.
obviously.
Well, I'd like to turn the subject away from the anatomy of it to the significance of it politically.
Let's stop that. Here's what I'm saying. Joan Rivers said, we've already had our first gay president, and then she died miraculously getting a facelift. A common surgery women do all the time, and some men. And she dies from it. But let's get off that subject. That's not where I was going with this. I'm trying to make a greater point. There's a reason why the FISA court has not released things, because it would embarrass the British government, because they know where it goes to. They honestly thought Hillary was going to be elected. And so they participated under the Five Eyes Agreement completely. And they did it through State Department so they could keep their hands clean. Dude, I know what I'm talking about on this. And anyways, sounds like music, so...
Yeah, well, that is bringing us to the end of the show. We have a minute. I'm just going to flesh this out a little bit. That particular